In terms of your own communication skills, it is important to give just as much of your attention to a message you are receiving as to one you are giving. Listening, for example, as well as being a method for gathering information, can convey your interest in what the other person is concerned with. This in itself can have a positive effect on your relationship with them, and if you are their manager, their motivation. Asking questions for clarification of the detail of the message can also convey that you have understood the message and that you want to, appropriately.
Sleepwalking is a disorder that occurs during sleep, in which a person may get up and walk around. It usually happens at certain times of the night, especially during the deeper stages of sleep. People who sleepwalk are not aware of their actions and often do not remember what they have done when they wake up. Sleepwalking is more common in children than in adults, and many children grow out of it over time. Sleepwalking is not the only type of unusual sleep behavior. Others include sleep talking, nightmares, and night terrors.
Housing is a key component of individual and family. In addition to being a place where family and friends can gather, housing is important for a sense of security and privacy. One significant aspect of security is the wealth in the homes of owner-occupiers. The wealth of households increases as the wealth or equity in the homes of owner-occupiers increases through paying off outstanding housing loans or as property values rise. In 2003-04, the primary residence was, on average, the most valuable asset of owner-occupier households, with the net value of owned homes accounting for an average of 55% of the net worth of those households. For our purposes, the words invention and innovation can be used interchangeably. More specifically, however, the term invention refers to the discovery of new products or processes, while innovation refers to the commercialization, bringing to the market of new products or processes. Furthermore, we can distinguish between product innovations and process innovations. Product innovations result in the production of a new product, such as the change from a three-wheel car to a four-wheel car, or the change from LP records to CD. Process innovations increase the efficiency of the methods of production of existing products, for example, the invention of the assembler line technique. The inventions and innovations that form industrial revolutions are those that open new doors and create new ways of doing things, not simply those that fill gaps in existing ways of doing things. Mocker, 1997. The core of the first industrial revolution in the 18th century was a succession of technological changes that brought about material advances in three basic areas. 1. The substitution of mechanical devices, such as machines, for human labor. 2. The substitution of inanimate sources of power, such as steam, for animate sources of power, such as horsepower. And 3. The substitution of mineral raw materials for vegetable or animal substances, and in general the use of new and more abundant raw materials.
Portraiture played an important role in the Elizabethan era. Queen Elizabeth's portraits conveyed the regal image of a powerful monarch, the steadfast, ageless force behind England. Owning paintings of the Queen was viewed as a status symbol. Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, displayed over 50 paintings at his castle in Kenilworth, Warwickshire, a bold reminder to guests that he was the man closest to the Queen. Although Elizabethan artists drew inspiration from the European Renaissance, it was Elizabeth herself who was the national preoccupation. Invoking her image in paintings and literature had the effect of elevating them to a higher level. Today, we like to think of art as an expression of feelings and beliefs. But in Elizabethan England, flattery was the order of the day, a time when most artists needed wealthy sponsors to survive.
Children have sound sleep patterns. They can soundly sleep for 8-9 hours and get up at a fixed time, but teenagers don't. Their sleep patterns are influenced by their erratic schedules, in which they sometimes have more classes but sometimes have fewer. Despite these factors, they actually need longer sleep, and insufficient sleep may be responsible for their learning problems. Barry Finnings, a professor at Monash University's College of Pharmacy in Melbourne, and PhD student Anita Schneider recently tested a new wrinkle cure. Twice daily, 20 male and female volunteers applied a liquid containing myxinol, a patented extract of Ochra hibiscus esculenta seed, to one side of their faces. On the other side, they applied a similar liquid without myxinol. Every week for a month, their wrinkles were tested by self-assessment, photography, and the size of depressions made in silicone molds. The results were impressive. After a month, the depth and number of wrinkles on the myxinol-treated side were reduced by approximately 27%, but Finnan's research, commissioned by a cosmetics company, is unlikely to be published in a scientific publication. It's hard to even find studies that show the active ingredients in cosmetics penetrate the skin, let alone more comprehensive research on their effects. Even when rigorous studies are commissioned, companies usually control whether the work is published in the traditional scientific literature.
Being able to give a good and clear presentation to a public audience is a skill that you and your future employer will value greatly. Prospective employers invariably ask for your experience in using these key skills during interviews. You need to be able to articulate what makes a good and poor presentation and offer evidence for your knowledge. So, when you are asked to give a talk or produce a poster as part of your studies, recognize the importance of developing the skills of delivery as well as conveying the content. Posters and oral presentations are forms of presentation that enable you to develop your confidence in different ways. Posters check your ability to present information succinctly and present it in an attractive and message-focused way, while oral presentations allow for more information and a more in-depth delivery. In both modes, you will probably find yourself taking questions and explaining your ideas.
In the framework of Bourdieu's theory, human society operates through a complex system of classifications, where social groups are defined not only by their material resources, but also by their cultural capital, forms of knowledge, taste, and practice that are valued by dominant social structures. These patterns of thought shape how individuals view themselves and others, perpetuating a hierarchy of power and status. Dominant classes in particular maintain their status by controlling these classifications, defining what is considered legitimate or refined knowledge, and thus marginalizing other ways of thinking and being. Bourdieu's concept of habitus describes how these patterns of thought become internalized in individuals, guiding their actions and perceptions in ways that reinforce the existing social system. At the same time, the process of classification is not fixed, but subject to contestation. Over time, the dominance of elite groups can be challenged, leading to shifts in the status of certain forms of knowledge or cultural practices. In this sense, Bourdieu suggests that the social structure is not merely a reflection of economic power, but also a reflection of the intellectual and cultural systems that preserve it. The task, therefore, is to recognize how these classifications function to legitimize power, and to question the hierarchical systems that serve to reduce the status of those on the margins.
The lute, a plucked string instrument, played a central role in European music from the late Middle Ages through the Baroque period. Its pear-shaped body and fretted neck made it a versatile instrument for both solo and ensemble performances. Unlike the modern guitar, the lute typically has paired strings, which produce a richer, more resonant tone. During the Renaissance, the lute was highly valued by both professional musicians and amateur players. Its popularity gradually declined in the 18th century, as keyboard instruments became more fashionable. Nevertheless, the lute remains an important subject of study for those interested in early music performance practices, and it is frequently used in historically informed concerts today.
the teaching of languages could be revolutionized following groundbreaking research by Victoria University, New Zealand, PhD graduate Paul Sulzberger. Dr. Sulzberger has found that the best way to learn a language is through frequent exposure to its sound patterns even if you have an clue what it all means. However crazy it might sound, just listening to the language, even though you don't understand it, is critical. A lot of language teachers may not accept that, he says. Our ability to learn new words is directly related to how often we have been exposed to the particular combinations of the sounds which make up the words. If you want to learn Spanish, for example, frequently listening to a Spanish language radio station on the internet will dramatically boost your ability to pick up the language and learn new words. Dr. Sulzberger's research challenges existing language learning theory. His main hypothesis is that simply listening to a new language sets up the structures in the brain required to learn the words.
Of course, for as long as there have been objects, they have been designed. Yet design only emerged as a dedicated discipline in the 19th century, and its literature and theory is still very much in its infancy. It is curious that, despite the increasingly prominent role that self-consciously designed commodities play in our everyday lives and in the way we define ourselves, the literature around the subject is hugely disappointing. In fact, beyond bland coffee table books, it is barely there at all. Nikolaus Pevsner's Pioneers of Modern Design, a classic Hegelian text treating modernism as the inevitable outcome of a historical process, is, despite being first published in 1936 and hopelessly dated, still the key text. There have been other books, from quirky Bruno Munari, Design as Art, to deadpan Norman Potter, What is a Designer? Things, Places, Messages, and Dayan Sujik's 2008 The Language of Things, which attempted a broader examination. Nevertheless, there is surprisingly little critique, an almost complete absence of theory, and little genuinely popular, compelling writing on the subject.
Whether you have blue eyes or brown, lactose tolerance or intolerance, curly hair or straight, the roots of these traits lie in your DNA. Deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA, is the hereditary material in humans and almost all other organisms, containing the biological instructions that make each species unique. DNA, first identified in the late 19th century and whose structure as a double helix was discovered in 1953 by Watson and Crick, is present in the nucleus of every cell in an organism. It's estimated that if unwound and linked together, the strands of DNA in one cell would stretch almost 6 feet in length. For many years, the complexity of DNA made understanding the full extent of its influence a distant dream. However, with the advent of advanced genomic technologies, scientists have made groundbreaking strides in understanding and mapping the human genome. He spent a painful night struggling with his health. It was difficult for him to continue with his duties as usual. Despite his determination and eagerness to teach, he was not permitted to attend class due to his health condition. He was happy to attend and fulfill his responsibilities, but his illness prevented him from doing so.
Each of us is born into and raised in a particular time, world, and environment with its own rhythm to which we entrain ourselves. Certain cultures have related to time as a cyclical phenomenon in which there is no pressure or future anxiety. The whole of existence goes around. The cycle of the seasons, of planting and harvesting, the daily return of the sun, of birth and death. In circular time, there is no pressing need to achieve and create newness, or to insatiably produce more than is needed to simply survive. Additionally, there is no fear of death. Such societies have successfully integrated the past and future into a peaceful sense of the present. They also honored the wisdom of elders who held the knowledge of the past upon which the future was clearly linked.
In an often cited study about counterfactuals, Medvec, Mady, and Jilovich, 1995, found that bronze medalists appeared happier than silver medalists in television coverage of the 1992 Summer Olympics. Medvec et al. Argued that bronze medalists compared themselves to fourth-place finishers, whereas silver medalists compared themselves to gold medalists. These counterfactuals were the most salient because they were either qualitatively different gold vs silver, or categorically different metal vs no metal from what actually occurred. Drawing on archival data and experimental studies, we show that Olympic athletes, among others, are more likely to make counterfactual comparisons based on their prior expectations, consistent with decision effect theory. Silver medalists are more likely to be disappointed because their personal expectations are higher than those of bronze medalists.
What is a country and how is a country defined? When people ask how many countries there are in the world, they expect a simple answer. After all, we've explored the whole planet, we have international travel, satellite navigation, and plenty of global organizations like the United Nations, so we should really know how many countries there are. However, the answer to the question varies according to whom you ask. Most people say there are 192 countries, but others point out that there could be more like 260 of them. So why isn't there a straightforward answer? The problem arises because there isn't a universally agreed definition of country, and because, for political reasons, some countries find it convenient to recognize or not recognize other countries.
Why does the smell of cut grass remind you of summer? How can you measure your nerve endings with a paper fastener? And how can you create the sound of church bells with just a serving spoon and a piece of string? These fascinating questions and more will be revealed by University of Manchester scientists when they take to the road on their brain bus. The bus is taking hands-on activities to test the senses to the suburbs, to show young and old alike how the brain works and how science can answer some of life's most captivating questions. Organizer Dr. Stuart Allen, lecturer at the Faculty of Life Sciences, explains, 3-year-olds and upwards can understand the senses, and it's an area that is intriguing to all ages. It takes effort to get out of bed on a Saturday morning and go to the museum. We are bringing science to your doorstep and going further afield this year in the hope of finding new and different audiences. We want people to see that science is interesting as well as important in our lives, and to encourage people who may not consider it possible to go to university. Until now, few sightings of the alien lionfish terroir miles have been reported in the Mediterranean, and it was questionable whether the species could invade this region like it has in the Western Atlantic. Dimitris Kletu, co-author of the paper, said in a statement, "But we found that lionfish have recently increased in abundance and within a year have colonized almost the entire southeastern coast of Cyprus, assisted by sea surface warming." Lionfish were originally found in the waters of the Pacific and Indian Oceans. They likely ended up in the Caribbean and Western Atlantic after being released from home aquariums. The invasion of the Mediterranean has different routes. The expansion of the Suez Canal has given lionfish even more access to the Mediterranean Sea, and warming water temperatures have provided the perfect environment for the invasive species.
Researchers already know that spending long periods of time in a zero-gravity environment, such as that inside the International Space Station, ISS, results in loss of bone density and damage to the body's muscles. That's partly why stays aboard the ISS are restricted at 6 months. And now a number of NASA astronauts are reporting that their 20/20 vision faded after spending time in space, with many needing glasses once they returned to Earth.
One of the most important things to remember is that classic does not necessarily translate to favorite, or best-selling literature is instead considered classic when it has stood the test of time, and it stands the test of time when the artistic quality it expresses, be it an expression of life, truth, beauty, or anything about the universal human condition continues to be relevant and continues to inspire emotional responses, no matter the period in which the work was written. Indeed, classic literature is considered as such. Regardless of book sales or public popularity, that said, classic literature usually merits lasting recognition from critics and other people in a position to influence such decisions and has a universal appeal. And while effective use of language as well as technical excellence is a must, not everything that is well written or is characterized by technical achievement or critical acclaim will automatically be considered a classic. Conversely, works that have not been acknowledged or received positively by the writer's contemporaries or critics can still be considered as classics. With the increase in women's participation in the labor force, many mothers have less time available to undertake domestic activities. At the same time, there has been increasing recognition that the father's role and relationship with a child is important. A father can have many roles in the family, ranging from income provider to teacher, carer, playmate, and role model. Therefore, balancing paid work and family responsibilities can be an important issue for both fathers and mothers in families.
Music was as important to the ancient Egyptians as it is in our modern society. Although it is thought that music played a role throughout the history of Egypt, those that study the Egyptian writings have discovered that music seemed to become more important in what is called the pharaonic period of their history. This was the time when the Egyptian dynasties of the pharaohs were established around 3100 BCE, and music was found in many parts of everyday Egyptian life.
Recently, research into embryonic development has given us an even better insight into how major structural changes might occur in a given population of organisms. We now understand that there are two major types of genes: developmental and housekeeping genes. Developmental genes are those that are expressed during embryonic development, and their proteins control the symmetry, skeletal development, organ placement, and overall form of the developing animal. In contrast, housekeeping genes are expressed during the animal's daily life to generate proteins which keep the cells, tissues, and organs in the body functioning properly. As you might suspect, mutations in developmental genes can have radical consequences for body form and function, whereas mutations in housekeeping genes tend to affect the health and reproductive success of the post-embryonic animal. Decision-making is central to the management of an enterprise. The manager of a profit-making business has to decide on the manner of implementation of the objectives of the business, at least one of which may well relate to allocating resources so as to maximize profit. A non-profit-making enterprise, such as a department of central or local government, will be making decisions on resource allocation so as to be economical, efficient, and effective in its use of finance. All organizations, whether in the private sector or the public sector, take decisions which have financial implications. Decisions will be about resources, which may be people, products, services, or long-term and short-term investment. Decisions will also be about activities, including whether and how to undertake them. Most decisions will at some stage involve consideration of financial matters, particularly cost. Children who skip school are increasingly on family holidays, government figures revealed today. Fewer children played truant this spring term compared with the spring term last year. Children missed 3M unauthorized days of school last term, compared with 7M days of school in the same period last year. But Hardcore group of truants, 6% of the school population, who account for more than 3/4 of all those on unauthorized absence, are more likely to be on a family holiday than they were in the same period last year. Someone, 2% of all absence was for family holidays not agreed by their school last term, compared with 0.9% for the same term last year. More than 60% of all absences were for illness, the same figure as last year.
What killed off the dinosaurs? The end of the Cretaceous period saw one of the most dramatic mass extinctions the Earth has ever seen. The fossil record shows that throughout their 160 million year existence, dinosaurs took on a huge variety of forms as the environment changed and new species evolved that were suited to these new conditions. Others that failed to adapt went extinct. But then 66 million years ago, over a relatively short time, dinosaurs disappeared, completely except for birds. Many other animals also died out, including pterosaurs, large marine reptiles, and other sea creatures such as ammonites. Although the number of dinosaur species was already declining, this suggests a sudden catastrophic event sealed their fate, causing unfavorable changes to the environment more quickly than dinosaurs and other creatures could adapt. The exact nature of this catastrophic event is still open to scientific debate. The catastrophe could have been an asteroid impact, volcanic eruptions, or the effect of both, together with more gradual changes in the Earth's climate over millions of years. Whatever the causes, the huge extinction that ended the age of the dinosaur left gaps in the ecosystem that were subsequently filled by mammals and birds, allowing them to evolve rapidly.
Governments also frequently subsidize local industries to help them compete in the global market. Subsidies come in the form of tax credits or direct payments. The most commonly used are farm subsidies. That allows producers to lower the price of local goods and services. This makes the products cheaper, even when shipped overseas. Subsidies work even better than tariffs. This method works best for countries that rely mainly on exports. On the contrary, sometimes subsidies can have the opposite effect. The Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933 allowed the government to pay farmers not to grow crops or livestock, which let their fields rest and regain nutrients. It helped the agriculture industry, but raised food costs during the Depression. The research, commissioned by HEDF, asked 1,000 students from UK universities for their views on the quality of their university campus and sheds new light on how students make decisions as they go through the application process. When asked what the most important factors were when deciding where to study, 76% of students ranks campus facilities as either quite or very important, with only 8% saying it was not very or not at all important in their choice. This was the fourth most important factor after course, location, and reputation. Estate quality increases in importance once a student has chosen a university, with 86% of students saying that it is quite or very important in their first year of studies. However, the important students attached to estates decreases to 79% for third-year students. The research also highlighted how factors such as demographics, region, and type of university attended have an impact on how students view the university buildings. Students in Russell Group universities are much more likely to describe their buildings as inspiring, closely followed by students in newer universities such as Lincoln, Gloucestershire, and Ravensbourne College. This pattern was repeated when students were asked to rate the overall quality and design of a state, with Russell Group students and students from newer universities more likely to rate the estates as excellent. Existing data shows capital expenditure on estates has been the highest amongst the Russell Group universities during 2001-2011. When asked where they would invest money in their universities, the top 3 areas in order of preference were smaller class sizes, bursaries for poorer students, and new buildings and facilities.
Early humans were hunter-gatherers, roaming from place to place, but their movements were controlled by the need for water. When humans started to grow food and established permanent settlements, water was needed for crops and animals as well as for people, so settlements have always grown up near reliable sources of water. Most major towns lie on the banks of rivers, or, where there are no streams or rivers, settlements exist where underground water can be reached by digging wells. The management of water resources has a long history. The oldest known dam in the world was constructed in Egypt about 5,000 years ago and was used for storing drinking and irrigation water. Farmers in Arabia at this time used the craters of extinct volcanoes as storage tanks for irrigation water and dug deep wells for their drinking water. Excavated ruins in India of similar antiquity retain the remains of water supply and drainage systems, which included baths and swimming pools.
Classical music, often regarded as a vestige of the past, continues to have a profound impact on modern life, influencing various aspects including stress relief, cognitive development, and cultural appreciation. Studies have demonstrated that listening to classical music can significantly reduce stress levels, leading to a calmer, more focused state of mind. This genre of music is not only a tool for relaxation, but also a catalyst for enhancing cognitive functions. For instance, the Mozart effect suggests that exposure to classical compositions can temporarily boost spatial reasoning skills. Moreover, classical music serves as a bridge to cultural heritage, offering insights into the historical, social, and philosophical contexts of different eras. The inclusion of classical music in contemporary media, such as films and video games, underscores its enduring appeal and its ability to convey emotional depth and narrative complexity. Despite the dominance of pop and electronic music in the mainstream, classical music continues to nurture a dedicated following, drawn to its timeless beauty and the technical prowess required to perform it. Its universal language speaks to the timeless human experience, reminding us of the enduring power of artistic expression.
Over 800 Shakespeare scholars from almost 50 countries will gather at King's College London next week, as the university co-hosts the 10th World Shakespeare Congress to explore and honor the bard's life and work. Organized by the International Shakespeare Association, the World Congress is held every 5 years. In 2016 is the first time it will be co-hosted in 2 locations that were integral to both the personal and working life of William Shakespeare. Delegates will arrive in London on Thursday following the start of the Congress on Sunday in Stratford-upon-Avon. With a main theme of creating and recreating Shakespeare, the Congress will look at the continuing global relevance of Shakespeare's work through a varied program of plenaries, panels, seminars, and workshops. Genius in the popular conception is inextricably tied up with precocity. Doing something truly creative, we're inclined to think, requires the freshness and exuberance and energy of youth. Orson Welles made his masterpiece Citizen Kane at 25. Herman Melville wrote a book a year through his late 20s, culminating at the age of 32 with Moby Dick. Mozart wrote his breakthrough piano Concerto No. 9 in E-flat major at the age of 21. In some creative forms like lyric poetry, the importance of precocity has hardened into an iron law. How old was T.S. Eliot when he wrote the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, I grow old, 23. Poets peak young, the creativity researcher James Kaufman maintains. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, the author of Flow, agrees. The most creative lyric verse is believed to be that written by the young. According to the Harvard psychologist Howard Gardner, a leading authority on creativity, lyric poetry is a domain where talent is discovered early, burns brightly, and then peters out at an early age.
Clean water was very important to the Romans. Cities, towns, and forts were built near springs. However, as Roman cities and towns grew, they needed to bring in water from further afield. As the population grew, so did the need for clean water. Trying to shift large volumes of water underground in pipes was not possible, as lead pipes would be too weak and bronze pipes would be too expensive. The Romans could not make cast iron pipes as the techniques for doing this were not known to them. If water could not be brought via pipes, the Romans decided to bring it overland in what were conduits. When the water got to the city, it was fed off into smaller bronze or ceramic pipes. To get the water to flow at an even and slow pace, conduits were built on a slight slope. Valleys were crossed by using aqueducts. One of the most famous of these is the Pont du Gard aqueduct at Nimes in southern France. Where possible, the Romans did take water through tunnels, but the hills needed to be relatively small for this to be successful.
Over the past 2 decades, around a third of the world's mangrove swamps have been converted for human use, with many turned into valuable shrimp farms. In 2007, an economic study of such shrimp farms in Thailand showed that the commercial profits per hectare were $9,632. If that were the only factor, conversion would seem an excellent idea. However, proper accounting shows that for each hectare, government subsidies formed $8,412 of this figure, and there were costs, too. $1,000 for pollution and $12,392 for losses to ecosystem services. These comprised damage to the supply of foods and medicines that people had taken from the forest, the loss of habitats for fish, and less buffering against storms. And because a given shrimp farm only stays productive for 3 or 4 years, there was the additional cost of restoring them afterwards. If you do so with mangroves themselves, add another $9,318 per hectare. The overall lesson is that what looks beneficial only does so because the profits are retained by the private sector, while the problems are spread out across society at large, appearing on no specific balance sheet.
Team Lab's digital mural at the entrance to Tokyo's Skytree, one of the world's monster skyscrapers, is 40 meters long and immensely detailed. However massive this form of digital art becomes, and it's a form, subject to rampant inflation, Inoko's theories about seeing are based on more modest and often pre-digital sources. An early devotee of comic books and cartoons, no surprises there, then computer games, he recognized when he started to look at traditional Japanese art that all those forms had something in common, something about the way they captured space. In his discipline of physics, Inoko had been taught that photographic lenses, along with the conventions of Western art, were the logical way of transforming 3 dimensions into 2, conveying the real world onto a flat surface. But Japanese traditions employed a different spatial logic, as he said in an interview last year with Jay Colabo, that is uniquely Japanese.
The speed of sound, otherwise known as Mach 1, varies with temperature. At sea level on a standard day, the temperature is 59 degrees F, and Mach 1 is approximately 761 mph. As the altitude increases, the temperature and speed of sound both decrease until about 36,000 feet, after which the temperature remains steady until about 60,000 feet. Within that 36,000, 60,000 foot range, Mach 1 is about 661 mph. Because of the variation, it is possible for an airplane flying supersonic at high altitude to be slower than a subsonic flight at sea level. The transonic band, the sound barrier, extends from around Mach 0.8, when the first supersonic shock waves form on the wing, to Mach 1, 2, when the entire wing has gone supersonic.
Catherine Muse does not meet bohemian hippie parents in her line of work. Typically one or both of the parents she sees work in the City of London. Professionals seek professionals, she says. Originally a nanny, Muse is now a parenting consultant, advising couples privately on changing their child's behavior, as well as doing corporate seminars for working parents. Her clients find they are unprepared for the chaos and unpredictability that having a child can entail. Parents are getting older, they have been in control their whole lives and been successful. Suddenly a baby turns up and life turns on its head. Nicknamed the 3-day nanny, Because of her pledge to fix behavioral problems in children under the age of 12 within 3 days, she is filming a new Channel 4 television series demonstrating her techniques. Role of the parenting consultant, distinct from that of a nanny, has developed, she says, as people are used to buying in expertise such as personal trainers or, in her case, parenting advice.
There has been a great variety of critical approach to Shakespeare's work since his death. During the 17th and 18th century, Shakespeare was both admired and condemned. Since then, much of the adverse criticism has not been considered relevant, although certain issues have continued to interest critics throughout the years. For instance, charges against his moral propriety were made by Samuel Johnson in the 18th century and by George Bernard Shaw in the 20th. Early criticism was directed primarily at questions of form. Shakespeare was criticized for mixing comedy and tragedy and failing to observe the unities of time and place, prescribed by the rules of classical drama. Dryden and Johnson were among the critics claiming that he had corrupted the language with false wit, puns, and ambiguity. While some of his early plays might justly be charged with a frivolous use of such devices, 20th century criticism has tended to praise their use in later plays as adding depth and resonance of meaning.
Cultural studies is a new way of engaging in the study of culture. In the past, many academic subjects including anthropology, history, literary studies, human geography, and sociology have brought their own disciplinary concerns to the study of culture. However, in recent decades there has been a renewed interest in the study of culture that has crossed disciplinary boundaries. Resulting activities and cultural studies have emerged as an intriguing and exciting area of intellectual inquiry that has already shed important new life on the character of human cultures and which promises to continue to do so. While there is a little doubt that cultural studies are coming to be widely recognized as an important and distinctive field of study, it does seem to encompass a potentially enormous area. This is because the term culture has a complex history and range of usages, which have provided a legitimate focus of inquiry for several academic disciplines.
It is an original work, not an excerpted passage. An abstract must be fully self-contained and make sense by itself without further reference to outside sources or to the actual paper. It highlights key content areas, your research purpose, the relevance or importance of your work, and the main outcomes. It is a well-developed single paragraph of approximately 250 words in length, which is indented and single-spaced. The function of the abstract is to outline briefly all parts of the paper. Although it is placed at the beginning of your paper, immediately following the title page, the abstract should be the last thing that you write, once you are sure of the conclusions you will reach.
One of the Supreme Court's most important responsibilities is to decide cases that raise questions of constitutional interpretation. The court decides if a law or government action violates the Constitution. This is known as judicial review and enables the court to invalidate both federal and state laws when they conflict with the Constitution. Since the Supreme Court stands as the ultimate authority in constitutional interpretation, its decisions can be changed only by another Supreme Court decision or by a constitutional amendment.
That Sigmund Freud became a major intellectual presence in 20th century culture is not in doubt. Nor is there any doubt that at all times there was both fervent enthusiasm over and bitter hostility to his ideas and influence. But the exact means by which Freud became, despite this hostility, a master of intellectual life on a par, already in the 1920s, with Karl Marx, Albert Einstein, Marie Curie, and Bertrand Russell, has not been sufficiently explored. Strikingly, Freud emerged as a 20th century icon without the endorsement and support of an institution or a profession, in contrast to Einstein, Curie, and Russell. Where are we to look for the details of this story of an emergent and new figure of immense cultural authority? One of the principal aims of this book is to show how this happened in one local, parochial yet privileged site, Cambridge, then is now a university town stranded in the English fens with a relatively small, fluctuating population.
Snails are not traditionally known for quick thinking, but new research shows they can make complex decisions using just 2 brain cells findings that could help engineers design more efficient robots. Scientists at the University of Sussex attached electrodes to the heads of freshwater snails as they searched for lettuce. They found that just 1 cell was used by the mollusk to tell if it was hungry or not, while another let it know when food was present. Food searching is an example of goal-directed behavior, during which an animal must integrate information about both its external environment and internal state while using as little energy as possible. Lead researcher Professor George Kemmings, Sci. This will eventually help us design the brain of robots based on the principle of using the fewest possible components necessary to perform complex tasks. What goes on in our brains when we make complex behavioral decisions and carry them out is poorly understood. Our study reveals for the first time how just 2 neurons can create a mechanism in an animal's brain which drives and optimizes complex decision-making tasks.
Leadership is all about being granted permission by others to lead their thinking. It is a bestowed moral authority that gives the right to organize and direct the efforts of others. But moral authority does not come from simply managing people effectively or communicating better or being able to motivate. It comes from many sources, including being authentic and genuine, having integrity, and showing a real and deep understanding of the business in question. All these factors build confidence. Leaders lose moral authority for 3 reasons. They behave unethically, they become plagued by self-doubt and lose their conviction, or they are blinded by power, lose self-awareness, and thus lose connection with those they lead as the context around them changes. Having said all this, it has to be assumed that if someone becomes a leader, at some point they understood the difference between right and wrong. It is up to them to abide by a moral code and up to us to ensure that the moment we suspect they do not, we fire them or vote them out.
Of the more than 1,000 bat species worldwide, 22 are native to North America. And while there are no pollinator bats in our area, gardeners should champion those that do live here because they are insectivorous. These bats consume moths, beetles, and mosquitoes and can eat up to 500 mosquito-sized insects per hour. They also protect gardens and crops from such pests as cucumber beetles, cutworms, and leafhoppers.
The Edo-Tokyo Tate Mono N is an open-air architectural museum, but could be better thought of as a park. 30 buildings from the 19th and early 20th centuries from all around Tokyo were restored and relocated to the space, where they can be explored by future generations to come. The buildings are a collection of houses and businesses, shops and bathhouses, all of which would have been present on a typical middle-class street from Edara to Shourira, Tokyo. The west section is residential, with traditional thatched roof bungalows of the 19th century. Meiji-era houses are also on view, constructed in a more Western style after Japan opened its borders in 1868. The Musashino Sabo Cafe occupies the ground floor of one such house, where visitors can enjoy a cup of tea. Grand residences like that of Korkio Takahashi, an early 20th century politician assassinated over his controversial policies, demonstrate how the upper class lived during that time period. The east section is primarily businesses from the 1920s and 30s, preserved with their wares on display. Visitors are free to wander through a kitchenware shop, a florist's, an umbrella store, a bar, a soy sauce shop, a tailor's, a cosmetics shop, and an incomplete with an operational noodle shop.
The increasing darkness in the northern hemisphere this time of year indicates to the plant that fall is coming on, so it starts recouping materials from the leaves before they drop off. Evergreens protect their needle-like foliage from freezing with waxy coatings and natural antifreezes, but broadleaf plants like sugar maples, birches, and sumacs have no such protections. As a result, they shed their leaves, but before they do, the plants first try to salvage important nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus.
Interior design is a professionally conducted, practice-based process of planning and realization of interior spaces and the elements within. Interior design is concerned with the function and operation of the aesthetics and its sustainability. The work of an interior designer draws upon many other disciplines such as environmental psychology, architecture, product design, and aesthetics, in relation to a wide range of building spaces including hotels, corporate and public spaces, schools, hospitals, private residences, shopping malls, restaurants, theaters, and airport terminals.
A renewed interest in well-being, especially among baby boomers, as well as rising personal incomes, led to more spending on health and fitness in 2005. This prompted an expansion in the number of fitness and recreation centers across the country. Golf courses also enjoyed renewed success as the sport increased in popularity, possibly the result of retiring baby boomers heading to the links. In 2005, households spent an average of $3,918 on recreation, up slightly from $3,678 in 2004. Items included in the 2005 figure are an average of $166 on sports and athletic equipment, $665 to buy and operate recreational vehicles such as snowmobiles, bicycles, and trailers, and $299 for the use of sports and recreation facilities.
New favorable traits evolve when genetic mutations arise that offer a survival edge. As the survivors of each generation pass on those beneficial mutations, the mutations and their adaptive traits become more common in the general population, though it may take millions of years for complex traits to evolve, say allowing humans to walk on two legs. Evolution itself happens with each generation as adaptive mutations become more frequent in the population. The genomic revolution has allowed biologists to see the natural selection process in action by making the genetic blueprint of hundreds of thousands of people available for comparison, by tracking the relative rise and fall of specific mutations. Across generations of people, researchers can infer which traits are spreading or dwindling. It would be reassuring to think that the electorate choose who to vote for based on the candidates, track records, and future policy promises. In truth, many of us are swayed simply by the way that politicians look. Consider a 2009 study that asked Swiss students to look at multiple pairs of unfamiliar French political candidates, and in each case to select the one who looked most competent. Most of the time, the candidate selected by students as looking the most competent was also the one who'd had real-life electoral success. The implication being that voters too had been swayed by the candidate's appearance. There's little evidence that appearance and competence actually correlate. Unsurprisingly, being attractive also helps win votes, especially in wartime. In peacetime, looking trustworthy is more of an advantage. Other research has shown that we're more likely to vote for male and female candidates with deeper voices. Affordable early years education and childcare potentially enables parents, particularly mothers, to be in paid employment. International studies have found that countries with greater enrollment rates in publicly funded or provided childcare also have higher maternal employment rates, although untangling causal relationships is complex. From the point of view of the household, additional income, especially for the less well-off, is itself associated with better outcomes for children, as child poverty has been shown to be a key independent determinant of children's outcomes. From the point of view of the public purse, as mothers enter employment, they are likely to claim fewer benefits and to generate extra revenues through income tax. The petrified forest is home to some of the most impressive fossils ever found, and more are being discovered each year as continuing erosion is exposing new evidence. Fossils found here show the forest was once a tropical region, filled with towering trees and extraordinary creatures. More than 150 different species of fossilized plants have been discovered by paleontologists and evidence, indicating ancient native people who inhabited this region about 10,000 years ago has been confirmed by archaeologists.
Clones of an eastern cottonwood, Populus deltoides, in the Bronx and other city spots grew to double the biomass of clones. Planted outside small towns upstate or on Long Island, says Gillian Gregg, now of the Environmental Protection Agency's Western Ecology Division in Corvallis, or. The growth gap comes from ozone damage, she and her New York colleagues report. Ozone chemists have known that concentrations may spike skyscraper high in city air, but during a full 24 hours, rural trees actually get a higher cumulative ozone exposure from urban pollution that blows in and lingers. A series of new experiments now shows that this hang-around ozone is the overwhelming factor in tree growth, the researchers say in the July 10 Nature. This study has profound importance in showing us most vividly that rural areas pay the price for urban pollution, says Stephen P. Long of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. This work should be a wake-up call, he adds.
Participating regularly in physical activity has been shown to benefit an individual's health and well-being. Regular physical activity is important in reducing the risk of chronic diseases such as heart disease and stroke, obesity, diabetes, and some forms of cancer. The National Physical Activity Guidelines for Adults recommends at least 30 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity, preferably every day of the week, to obtain health benefits.
People in parts of Western Africa and Southwestern Asia were the first to realize that the dark silvery rocks poking out of the earth could be worked into tools and weapons, sometime around 1500 BC. Evidence shows the metal was probably discovered there by accident when some ore was dropped into a fire and cooled into wrought iron, historians think. The Eureka moment didn't reach Europe for another 500 years, traveling slowly north and west through Greece, Italy, Central Europe, and finally to the British Isles, with the spread of the famous Celtic tribes. The Celts diffused iron technology over much of the continent through warfare, where their victory was assured due to the strength of iron weapons. Perhaps not the most peaceful of cultural exchanges, but where the technology did travel, it caught on fast. Iron made life a lot easier in those days, when just living to the age of 45 was a feat. By that time, much of Europe had settled into small village life, toiling the soil with bronze and stone tools. Iron farming tools, such as sickles and plow tips, made the process more efficient and allowed farmers to exploit tougher soils, try new crops, and have more time for other activities.
The environmental impact of the global textile industry is hard to overstate. 1/3 of the water used worldwide is spent fashioning fabrics. For every ton of cloth produced, 200 tons of water is polluted with chemicals and heavy metals. An estimated 1 trillion kilowatt-hours of electricity powers the factories that card and comb, spin and weave, and cut and stitch materials into everything from t-shirts to towels, leaving behind mountains of solid waste and a massive carbon footprint. Where the industry is today is not really sustainable for the long term, says Shreyaskar Shohuri, chief executive of Pratibha Syntex, a textile manufacturer based outside Indore, India. With something of an "if you build it, they will come" attitude, Mr. Shohuri has steered Pratibha toward the leading edge of eco-friendly textile production. Under his direction, Pratibha began making clothes with organic cotton in 1999. Initially, the company couldn't find enough organic farms growing cotton in central India to supply its factories. To meet production demands, Shohuri's team had to convince conventional cotton farmers to change their growing methods. Pratibha provided seeds, cultivation instruction, and a guarantee of fair trade prices for their crops. Today, Pratibha has a network of 28,000 organic cotton growers across the central states of Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, and Orissa.
Whether you want to exercise and stay healthy, train professionally with like-minded people, or indulge your competitive streak, Trinity Sport and Fitness have it covered. We've got a dedicated support development team on campus to support every student in taking part in sports. You might want to participate in sports competitions, volunteer with a local sports class, or simply play for fun with our social sport program. Trinity Fitness members of our public-facing sports facility will also entitle you to discounts when you are booking a sports facility and fitness class. You will also get an opportunity to benefit from tailored personal training, free activities events, and lots more.
Herbal is a book of plants, describing their appearance, their properties, and how they may be used for preparing ointments and medicines. The medical use of plants is recorded on fragments of papyrus and clay tablets from ancient Egypt, Samaria, and China that date back 5000 years but document traditions far older still. Over 700 herbal remedies were detailed in the Papyrus Ebers, an Egyptian text written in 1500 BC. Around 65 BC, a Greek physician called Dioscorides wrote a herbal that was translated into Latin and Arabic. Known as De Materia Medica, it became the most influential work on medicinal plants in both Christian and Islamic worlds until the late 17th century. An illustrated manuscript copy of the text made in Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, survives from the 6th century. The first printed herbals date from the dawn of European printing in the 1480s. They provided valuable information for apothecaries, whose job it was to make the pills and potions prescribed by physicians. In the next century, landmark herbals were produced in England by William Turner, considered to be the father of British botany, and John Gerard, whose illustrations would inspire the floral fabric, wallpaper, and tile designs of William Morris 4 centuries later. Drive down any highway, and you'll see a proliferation of chain restaurants. Most likely, if you travel long and far enough, you'll see McDonald's golden arches as well as signs for Burger King, Hardee's, and Wendy's, the big four of burgers. Despite its name, though, Burger King has fallen short of claiming the burger crown, unable to surpass market leader McDonald's No. 1 sales status. Always the bridesmaid and never the bride, Burger King remains No. 2. Worse yet, Burger King has experienced a 6-year 22% decline in customer traffic, with its overall quality rating dropping while ratings for the other three contenders have increased. The decline has been attributed to inconsistent product quality and poor customer service. Although the chain tends to throw advertising dollars at the problem, an understanding of integrated marketing communication theory would suggest that internal management problems, 19 CEOs in 50 years, need to be rectified before a unified long-term strategy can be put in place. The importance of consistency in brand image and messages at all levels of communication has become a basic tenet of IMC theory and practice. The person who takes the customer's order must communicate the same message as Burger King's famous tagline, "Have it your way," or the customer will just buzz up the highway to a chain restaurant that seems more consistent and therefore more reliable. Men and women are making different choices about their retirement savings, which could lead to very different investment outcomes, according to Dr. Claire Matthews, Director of Financial Planning at Massey University's Center for Banking Studies. Speaking at the 2012 New Zealand Finance Colloquium held at Massey University's Albany campus last week, Dr. Matthews said demographic characteristics had a substantial impact on the choices people made about KiwiSaver funds and retirement savings more generally. When it came to funding selection, she found there were significant differences based on gender. Men are more likely to invest in aggressive and growth funds, while women are more likely to choose conservative funds. Males are risk takers, whether it's in their choice of car or their investment fund, she says. But when it comes to long-term savings, risk-taking can actually be an advantage. Dr. Matthews also found that men are more likely than women to have prior savings when joining KiwiSaver. Just over half of male respondents said they had savings already, while only 38% of women did. These figures reflect and confirm, quite disappointingly, the difference between males and females and the level of interest they take in financial planning, Dr. Matthews says. It's important for all New Zealanders to be better educated about their personal finances, but this is particularly so for women. Other demographic factors including age, ethnicity, education, and income can also influence the choices being made about retirement savings. Dr. Matthews found that those with bachelor and higher degrees and those in households with a pre-tax income of $100,000 or more were more likely to choose aggressive and stimulating funds. On the other hand, both the youngest and oldest age groups were more likely to be invested in conservative funds. While this might be appropriate for the life cycle stage of older investors, it might not be so appropriate for younger, longer-term investors.
Bones are extremely strong. One of their main functions is to protect organs. For example, the skull protects the brain, ribs protect the heart and lungs. There are 3 types of joints, including fixed joints, slightly movable joints, and freely moving joints.
Music is an important part of our lives. We connect and interact with it daily, and use it as a way of projecting our self-identities to the people around us. The music we enjoy, whether it's country or classical, rock and roll or rap, reflects who we are. But where did music, at its core, first come from? It's a puzzling question that may not have a definitive answer. 1. Leading researcher, however, has proposed that the key to understanding the origin of music is nestled snugly in the loving bond between mother and child. In a lecture at the University of Melbourne, Richard Parncutt, an Australian-born professor of systematic musicology, endorsed the idea that music originally spawned from motheries, the playful voices mothers adopt when speaking to infants and toddlers. As the theory goes, increased human brain sizes caused by evolutionary changes occurring between 1 and 2,000 years ago resulted in earlier births, more fragile infants, and a critical need for stronger relationships between mothers and their newborn babies. According to Parncutt, who is based at the University of Graz in Austria, motheries arose as a way to strengthen this maternal bond and to help ensure an infant's survival.
The United Nations is an international organization founded in 1945. Due to its unique international character and the powers vested in its founding charter, the organization can take action on a wide range of issues, and provide a forum for its 193 member states to express their views through the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, and other bodies and committees. The work of the United Nations reaches every corner of the globe. Although best known for peacekeeping, peacebuilding, conflict, prevention, and humanitarian assistance, there are many other ways the United Nations and its system, specialized agencies, funds, and programs affect our lives and make the world a better place.
The narrative of law and order is located fundamentally at the level of individual guilt and responsibility. Criminal acts are seen as individual issues of personal responsibility and culpability to which the state responds by way of policing, prosecution, adjudication, and punishment. This is but one level at which crime and criminal justice can be analyzed. The problem is that so often analysis ends there at the level of individual action. Characterized in terms of responsibility, guilt, evil, in few other areas of social life does individualism have this hold. To take but one instance, it would be absurd to restrict analysis of obesity to individual greed. It should similarly be widely seen as absurd to restrict analysis of criminal justice issues to the culpability of individuals.
Seminars are not designed to be mini lectures. Their educational role is to provide an opportunity for you to discuss interesting and or difficult aspects of the course. This is founded on the assumption that it is only by actively trying to use the knowledge that you have acquired from lectures and texts that you can achieve an adequate understanding of the subject. If you do not understand a point, it is highly unlikely that you will be the only person in the group in that position. You will invariably be undertaking service for the entire group if you come to the seminar equipped with questions on matters which you feel you did not fully understand. The seminar is to provoke discussion.
Paris is very old. There has been a settlement there for at least 6,000 years, and its shape has been determined in part by the River Seine and in part by the edicts of France's rulers. But the great boulevards we admire today are relatively new and were constructed to prevent any more barricades being created by the rebellious population. That work was carried out in the middle 19th century. The earlier Paris had been in part a maze of narrow streets and alleyways, but you can imagine that the work was not only highly expensive, but caused great distress among the 500,000 or so residents whose houses were simply razed and whose neighborhoods disappeared. What is done cannot usually be undone, especially when buildings are torn down.
At the beginning of the 21st century, the relationship between standard and non-standard language is, evidently, still an uncertain one. We are at a transitional point between two eras. We seem to be leaving an era when the rules of standard English, as elected and defined by prescriptive grammarians, totally conditioned our sense of acceptable usage, so that all other usages and varieties were considered to be inferior or corrupt, and excluded from serious consideration. And we seem to be approaching an era when non-standard usages and varieties, previously denigrated or ignored, are achieving a new presence and respectability within society, reminiscent of that found in Middle English when dialect variation in literature was widespread and uncontentious. But we are not there yet. The rise of standard English has resulted in a confrontation between the standard and non-standard dimensions of the language, which has lasted for over 200 years, and this has had traumatic consequences which will take some years to eliminate. Once people have been given an inferiority complex about the way they speak or write, they find it difficult to shake off.
You have about 30 minutes to answer each question. You must take account of how many marks are available for each part when you answer it. Even if you think you can write more, don't spend 15 minutes answering a part worth only 5 marks. Leave space at the end of your answer and come back to it if you have time to spare later. And if you can't think of an answer to some part, leave a space and move on to the next part. Don't write about something else if you don't know the correct answer. This is just a waste of your valuable time and the examiner's. If you see a movie or a TV advertisement that involves a fluid behaving unusually, it was probably made using technology based on the work of a Monash researcher, Professor Joseph Monahan, who pioneered an influential method for interpreting the behavior of liquids that underlies most special effects involving water, has been honored with election to the Australian Academy of Sciences. Professor Monahan, one of only 17 members elected in 2011, was recognized for developing the method of smoothed particle hydrodynamics, SPH, which has applications in the fields of astrophysics, engineering and physiology, as well as movie special effects. His research started in 1977 when he tried to use computer simulation to describe the formation of stars and stellar systems. The algorithms available at the time were incapable of describing the complicated systems that evolve out of chaotic clouds of gas in the galaxy. Professor Monahan and his colleague Bob Jingold took the novel and effective approach of replacing the fluid or gas in the simulation with large numbers of particles with properties that mimicked those of the fluid. SPH has become a central tool in astrophysics, where it is currently used to simulate the evolution of the universe after the Big Bang, the formation of stars, and the processes of planet building.
Complementary therapies such as those practiced by naturopaths, chiropractors, and acupuncturists have become increasingly popular in Australia over the last few decades. Interest initially coincided with enthusiasm for alternative lifestyles, while immigration and increased contact and trade with China have also had an influence. The status of complementary therapies is being revisited in a number of areas: legal regulation, the stances of doctors' associations, their inclusion in medical education, and scientific research into their efficacy. What history books tell us about the past is not everything that happened, but what historians have therefore selected. They cannot put in everything. Choices have to be made. Choices must similarly be made about which aspects of the past should be formally taught to the next generation in the shape of school history lessons. So, for example, when a national school curriculum for England and Wales was first discussed at the end of the 1980s, the history curriculum was the subject of considerable public and media interest. Politicians argued about it. People wrote letters to the press about it. The Prime Minister of the time, Margaret Thatcher, intervened in the debate. Let us think first about the question of content. There were two main camps on this issue: those who thought the history of Britain should take pride of place, and those who favored what was referred to as world history.
Dictatorship is not a modern concept. 2,000 years ago, during the period of the Roman Republic, exceptional powers were sometimes given by the Senate to individual dictators such as Sulla and Julius Caesar. The intention was that the dictatorship would be temporary and that it would make it possible to take swift and effective action to deal with an emergency. There is some disagreement as to how the term should be applied today. Should it be used in its original form to describe the temporary exercise of emergency powers? Or can it now be applied in a much broader sense as common usage suggests?
If you are interested in studying but have other commitments, our online and distance learning courses offer an alternative, flexible mode of study. Teaching is conducted through a mixture of audiovisual, written, and interactive materials. There are also opportunities for online discussion, and collaborative projects with tutors and other students. Some programs include residential modules taught on campus, giving you the chance to meet and work alongside your tutors and fellow students face-to-face. Our graduate school provides comprehensive support for distance and part-time researchers, many of whom study for up to 6 years or more. The Cardona Salt Mountain, Montagne de Sal, is a huge geologic formation made almost entirely of the world's favorite edible mineral. Formed 2 million years ago when low-density salt was pushed up through the much harder materials surrounding it, the Cardona Salt Mountain is one of the largest domes of its kind in the world and unique in Europe. While small amounts of other minerals pervade the savory hill, the salt pile would have a near translucent quality if not for the thin layer of reddish clay coating the exterior. The significance of the mountain was recognized as early as Neolithic times. However, it was the Romans who began exploiting the mountain for its salt, which began to bolster the young Cardonian economy. With the invention of industrial mining techniques, a mine was built into the side of the mountain and a thriving facility formed at its base, as excavators dragged enormous amounts of potash, water-soluble salt from the innards of the hill. In addition to the mineral export, the locals of Cardona began making salt sculptures to sell and invented a number of salty pastries unique to the area. The best way to experience the museum is from the top floor down. One emerges from the elevators into a spacious hallway. At some hours, museum staff members are giving small hands-on demonstrations of techniques such as quillwork. These activities take place near wall cases filled with objects. These small surveys of the museum's vast holdings are called windows on the collection, appearing on every floor in the halls that overlook the rotunda. These display cases serve as a kind of visible storage, presenting a panoply of objects and materials. Their arrangements are artistic, and their contents perhaps intentionally designed to jar the visitor. For example, the largest case on the 4th floor displays animal imagery of all sorts. Older sculptures of birds, mammals, and sea creatures appear alongside witty contemporary works such as Larry Beck's version of a Yupik mask made of rubber tire treads and metal tools, and Jim Scoppert's Walrus Loves Baby Clams mask. Recently made ivory carvings challenge the common distinction between so-called authentic fine art and commodity, a distinction which may be passé in the academic world, but which still holds strong among much of the general public.
Over 60 years after Amelia Earhart vanished mysteriously in the Pacific during her attempt to become the first person to circumnavigate the world along the equator, Linda Finch, a San Antonio businesswoman, accomplished pilot, and aviation historian, recreated and completed her idol's last flight as a tribute to the aviation pioneer's spirit and vision. On March 17, 1997, MS Finch and a navigator took off from Oakland International Airport, California, in a restored Lockheed Electra 10E, the same make and model aircraft that Earhart used on her last journey. The mission to fulfill Amelia Earhart's dream was called World Flight 1997. Although MS Finch was not the first to attempt Earhart's around-the-world journey, she was the first to do it in a historic airplane. Linda Finch closely followed the same route that Earhart flew, stopping in 18 countries before finishing the trip 2.5 months later when she landed back at the Oakland airport on May 28. Over 1 million school children and others were able to follow the flight daily through an interactive website part of a free multimedia educational program called You Can Soar, provided by the project's sponsor.
Populations can change through 3 processes. fertility, mortality, and migration. Fertility involves the number of children that women have and differs from fecundity, a woman's childbearing potential. Mortality involves the causes, consequences, and measurement of processes affecting death in a population. Demographers most commonly study mortality using the life table, a statistical device which provides information about the mortality conditions, most notably the life expectancy, in the population. Migration refers to the movement of persons from an origin place to a destination place across some predefined political boundary. Migration researchers do not designate movements as migrations unless they are somewhat permanent. Thus, demographers do not consider tourists and travelers to be migrating. While demographers who study migration typically do so through census data on place of residence, indirect sources of data including tax forms and labor force surveys are also important. Demography is today widely taught in many universities across the world, attracting students with initial training in social sciences, statistics, or health studies.
Victoria University of Wellington has conferred an honorary degree on a distinguished astrophysicist in a recent graduation ceremony. Professor Warwick Couch received the honorary degree of Doctor of Science for his remarkable contribution to our knowledge of galaxies and dark energy. Professor Couch is a distinguished astrophysicist who has played a crucial role in the discovery that the universe is expanding at an accelerating rate, a finding which led to the lead scientists being awarded a Nobel Prize in Physics in 2011, which he attended in recognition of his contribution. In his research, Professor Couch uses large ground-based and space-based telescopes to observe galaxy clusters, which are the largest structures in the universe. He is also involved in a number of national and international committees overseeing the management of these telescopes. In addition to his own research activities, Professor Couch has worked to support young researchers and provide public comment on astronomy internationally.
Over the last 10,000 years, there seem to have been two separate and conflicting building sentiments throughout the history of towns and cities. One is the desire to start again, for a variety of reasons. An earthquake or a tidal wave may have demolished the settlement, or fire destroyed it, or the new city marks a new political beginning. The other can be likened to the effect of a magnet. Established settlements attract people, who tend to come whether or not there is any planning for their arrival. The clash between these two sentiments is evident in every established city, unless its development has been almost completely accidental or is lost in history. Incidentally, many settlements have been planned from the beginning, but for a variety of reasons, no settlement followed the plan. A good example is Curwen, on the Clyde River in New South Wales, which was surveyed in the second half of the 19th century, in expectation that people would come to establish agriculture and a small port, but no one came. Most country towns in New South Wales started with an original survey, whose grid lines are still there today in the pattern of the original streets.
Books and articles highlighting intractable debt, poverty, and development abound in both the academic and popular literature. This addition to the debate is both timely and interesting, as it subsumes the economic debate to the broader social, political, environmental, and institutional context of debt in developing countries. Debt for Development Exchanges, History and New Applications is intended for a wide audience including academics from a range of disciplines including accounting and finance, non-government organizations, NGOs, civil society groups, and both debtor and creditor governments and public sector organization. Professor Ross Buckley, author and editor, has developed an international profile in the area of debt relief, and this book is the outcome of an Australian Research Council ARC discovery grant to explore debt for development mechanisms that relieve debt, improve development outcomes from aid, are practically and politically attractive to creditors, and contribute to regional security.